I'd like to begin by talking about the exam last week. Most of you did pretty well. The average was an 83%, and about three-quarters of you received either an A or B. Scores ranged anywhere from several of you who received 100%, and there were a handful of you who didn't do so well and received either a C or even lower. If you were one of those students who really struggled, I know a couple of you have reached out to me and asked for additional help and things that you can do to make sure that your grades are better on the future exam. There will be one more exam that will be given in week 7 during module 7, and that'll be the last exam for this class. I think some suggestions for how to improve your score for the second exam include making sure that you do watch all the lectures thoroughly. I do take the time to explain many of the concepts in detail, so don't just listen to them maybe in the background or as you're in the car. I do try to listen and pay attention as I work through the examples. I think second is making sure that you understand all of the homework problems. The homework problems are designed so that each attempt, the first attempt, you can go back through and, of course, correct the ones that you made mistakes on. So I encourage you to read those questions in detail in which you missed. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a phone call. I do video conferences as well. I know a lot of you have emailed me, and I think I'm very quick to respond. I certainly promise to respond within 24 hours, although in many cases it's often less. So if you are struggling after you go through the homework the first time, please don't wait, until the last second or just guess on the second attempt. I do want to make sure that you understand the material in order to be successful. The other thing that you can do is make sure that you're reading the book as well. Each module lists the chapters in the book that follow along with the topics that I'm covering. And while I certainly don't cover all of the topics in the book, I think the book can be very helpful to explain the same concepts in a slightly different way. The other thing I did, one student in particular asked for this, is that the Connect program has a software called LearnSmart, which are basically mini quizzes or flashcards or problem sets that you can do for extra help. I didn't assign them for a grade. I think you already have enough homework assignments and work to do for this class. But nevertheless, for each of the remaining modules, if you click on the LearnSmart modules link on the left-hand side of Blackboard, there's a link to 6 of these LearnSmart questions. And what they do is when you click on that topic, it'll ask you a whole series of questions within that particular section. So this week, if we're talking about measuring the economy, it'll ask you a series of questions about measuring GDP, what components go into GDP, ask you some sample problems to work on. And again, this is entirely optional. I am not requiring this for a grade, but I am giving you these resources to make sure that if you felt like maybe you just needed some more practice, you felt like some of the topics weren't sinking in, that you can actually go through and work through these problems, work through these definitions on your own to make sure you understand the material. So again, that's if you on the left-hand side of Blackboard when you log in, it's called LearnSmart modules, and there's 6 of them there. And each of the 2 modules, they're in sets of 2, are for each of the weeks that we're covering. So the first 2 are for week 5, the second 2 are for week 6, and the last 2 are for week 7. So I highly encourage you to take advantage of those LearnSmart modules if you weren't successful in the first exam. So let me make some comments on the 4th discussion board post, which was talking about externalities. And I asked you to put yourself in either the CEO of Rumpke's shoes or as a local government official. In particular, how would you respond to this case that was given? And again, there's a lot of great discussion on this topic, and I think a lot of the controversy surrounds it on whether or not Rumpke should be levied a fine as a result of their actions. And in particular, there was discussion about, well, what happens if we fine Rumpke? Who is actually paying the cost of those fines? So if you read one of the discussion board posts by Megan Elam, she talks about how if consumers are asked to pay an additional fine or an additional fee for their garbage, then they'll be more sensitive in terms of what types of garbage that they would put out when someone comes to pick up, and that they would perhaps conserve the amount of trash that they put into these garbage cans. And I think that's a intuitive observation. Certainly people respond to incentives. And so we know if the price of something goes up, then they're probably going to use less of it. Zoltan, in his discussion board post, I think calls it a per throw fee. So for every, maybe a garbage can that you use, there's an additional fee that's attached with it, so that people are really paying that marginal cost for the additional trash that they put into the landfill. And so you can think, I live in the city of Cincinnati, and there's actually, I don't even pay an explicit fee. It's just part of my taxes. So I can put 1 bag of trash out, or I can put 5 bags of trash out in a trash can, and I'm paying the same cost regardless. So this idea of imposing either a fine or making sure that customers charge or pay more for their garbage is intuitive. The problem with levying fines, however, is that it's not entirely clear who is actually bearing the cost of this. So in response to Megan's post about consumers paying an additional fee, Jorge made the comment that, well, if you levy the fines, the people who are going to actually be paying the fine, if it's imposed on the firm itself, Rumpke, perhaps they might have less money to be able to address the problem. So if you're fining them, they might divert funds that they otherwise could use to make sure that the waste issue and the smell issue is being addressed. But the other problem is that many firms often just pass on these fines or higher costs back onto customers. And so if the idea is to punish the firm, you're kind of subverting that idea if the firm can then pass on those fines to either customers, or perhaps they lower the wages of their workers. So it's not entirely clear that when you levy a fine, that it's actually going to be levied against the entity that you want it to be levied against. Firms are particularly nebulous in that it's a firm is, in one sense, it's a nexus of contracts. All right, so you'll talk about this in your legal classes in the MBA. And that one definition of a firm is really this nexus of contracts. And so that can be very hard to levy a firm on any one particular individual within the firm. Typically, those costs get passed on to either workers or lower profits for shareholders, or either the customers themselves. A couple other comments were made about whether or not people were aware of these costs and the smell as they moved into the area. So, for example, if you decided to purchase a home that was near the landfill, you probably purchased it at a lower price than, say, that same exact home on the east side of town. And part of the lower price is that you're willing to take into account the risk of having a landfill nearby, and there being an associated smell associated with it, or some of these other negative externalities. And so if you do decide to go through and maybe use taxpayer dollars to alleviate some of the problems that are happening at Rumpke, you might actually be subsidizing those people who made a conscious decision, paid a lower price, accepting that risk, and in fact you're somewhat bailing them out by using government funds as a result of these fines, maybe to alleviate some of this risk. So people knew what they were getting into when they purchased a home next to Rumpke, and so by levying a fine or raising taxes to address this issue, it might actually just be subsidizing their decisions. So it's a tricky problem. There's a lot of great discussion about whether or not fines should be used. That being said, I'm not necessarily opposed to fines, and I think when they are used appropriately and under certain circumstances, they make a lot of sense. But they're not without their unintended consequences. I think one of the best definitions of economics is that it's the study of unintended consequences, and that everyone responds to incentives, whether it's the customers, the workers, the shareholders, or the managers. And so when you do decide to introduce fines, you've just got to be very careful that you understand what the consequences will be as a result. So those are some of the thoughts that I had on discussion board 4. We're back to a routine for the next couple of weeks. So for this week and next week, continue to work on the discussion board posts and your homework assignments. And as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Quite a few of you already use email and use instant messenger and phone calls as a way to contact me. So continue to take advantage of that. And thanks a lot, and hope you have a great week.